young mother.
He meant the world to her, and she was a loving mother.
A sick child.
He's curled up in a ball in tremendous amount of pain.
But was it an unexplained illness?
There were red flags, obviously.
Or prolonged torture?
It's something that will haunt me.
All leading to this horrific discovery.
We actually had to watch a video of a 5-year-old child being murdered.
Lacey Spears grew up in Decatur, Alabama, and this all-American girl loved American Girl dolls.
And she would live through them. For Lacey, it seemed to be a much bigger thing.
Soon, Lacey's love of dolls grew into a profound love for real children, too.
She always wanted to be looking after children. And when she left school, she went into childcare.
Right away, Lacey wanted children of her own. And her dreams came true when she got pregnant and gave birth to a beautiful little boy she named Garnett. But motherhood got off to a rocky start when at just 9 days old, Garnett became so ill that he had to be hospitalized.
Within days, she was taking him to hospital and complaining that he wasn't eating and he was failing to thrive and he was getting all these infections and everything.
This will be just one of dozens of trips they will make to the doctor to address Garnett's growing list of mysterious health issues.
The doctors were baffled by the various diseases which were inexplicable.
Most notably, Lacey told doctors that Garnett would not eat. Then this unusual request.
Now, he had a feeding tube at one point.
That was put in about when he was 8 months old. She asked to have a feeding tube put in because she said he was a failure to thrive child.
But Lacey didn't stop there with her son's surgeries.
And he also had another procedure to close up his throat so he couldn't regurgitate or be sick.
That's right. Now, Garnett will be fed through a tube and is no longer able to throw up. His little body is forced to ingest everything his mother is feeding him.
She wanted to be able to control what he ate.
And from Garnett's daily diet to his frequent hospital visits, it was all documented on Lacey's multiple social media websites. It appeared that this growing online community is where this young single mom turned for support, comfort, and sympathy. Lacey even kept a detailed blog called Garnett's Journey, as seen here in one update she wrote. September, what a month, and it's only half over. Garnett has enjoyed driving his tractor through our neighborhood, playing in the rain, riding his bike for hours, and we spent a few days in the hospital. And despite Garnett's laundry list of medical treatments...
Was Garnett actually a sick kid?
According to Lacey, he was a very sick kid. Everybody else never saw any of that.
Now, Garnett has visited 20 different medical facilities, but Lacey claims there is still no relief for her little boy. Appearing desperate for a cure, Lacey and her son move to Florida. There, she discovers a possible solution for her son's medical needs.
When Lacey said she wanted to change her son's diet over to a holistic diet, she was introduced to some people that said, you know, this is a place where the way they live fits the diet that we think your son might thrive with.
Looking for the ultimate in holistic food, Lacey and Garnett move again, this time to the secluded area of Chestnut Ridge, New York, to a place called the Fellowship Community with a focus on sustainable living and a farm-to-table diet.
I mean, she came into the Fellowship Community and she told everyone about Garnett, the terrible illnesses he'd had over his life. There were a lot of people that, you know, were convinced that Lacey was a great mother, you know, she looked after Garnett.
Lacey and Garnett are welcomed with open arms. Garnett, now a lively and happy little 5-year-old boy, begins to make friends and hang out with other families. Then, the oddest thing starts to happen.
Whenever he'd be with other, you know, friends, or they'd take him to the local diner and he'd wolf as much as he could. He always asked for seconds or thirds.
He was hungry.
Yeah, he was hungry.
And by many accounts, a normal kid.
Yeah, he had a very, very healthy appetite. But Lacey would say he never ate.
Eyebrows begin to rise. Lacey's new neighbors aren't seeing any of the signs of the sick child she's chatted about all these years on her social media accounts. But their suspicion turns to sympathy when Lacey shares some devastating news.
You know, initially she had told me that her fiancé, the baby's father, Blake, had perished. He was a former policeman who was killed in a tragic car accident.
Blake's death appeared to be heartbreaking for Lacey, as seen on her blog post. Lacey wrote, November, celebrated Garnett's first Thanksgiving home and our first without Daddy Blake. As the community of Chestnut Ridge rallies around Lacey, new questions surface about their new neighbor and her ailing son.
And there were certain suspicions that something was going on, but nobody could really put their finger on what she was doing.
Young mother Lacey Spears has been searching for answers for her chronically sick 5-year-old son, Garnett. Now living in the tight-knit area of Chestnut Ridge, New York, people in the community become suspicious.
She told everyone about Garnett, the terrible illnesses he'd had over his life, how he was a failure to thrive child who had all these various diseases and couldn't eat. They'd take him out to a diner and they'd see him eat, you know, double portions or whatever. And things started not to add up.
But Lacey is adamant that something is very wrong with her son's health. And on one afternoon, following symptoms of a high fever, severe headache, and convulsions, Lacey rushes Garnett to the hospital. It's Friday when they check in.
The mother complained that he was having seizures. They hooked him up to an EEG. The first day, there is no seizures.
And no seizure activity on Saturday or Sunday. According to the medical staff, 5-year-old Garnett is the picture of health.
Sunday morning comes, the nurse comes in with some great news for Lacey that Garnett had no seizure activity. He most likely would be going home.
Then, just moments after the nurses and doctors leave Garnett's hospital room,
a young boy who's bouncing in the bed one moment, and within 10 minutes, deathly ill.
Lacey gives a play-by-play on her Facebook page with this post. Please, please, send G some love. Went from fine to really sick in minutes. Then a tragic turn for the worse that no one saw coming.
Essentially, the child was brain dead.
Again, Lacey takes to Facebook. My sweet baby Garnett has been declared brain dead. It can't even be possible. That's my baby boy. I'm not ready to let him go. Doctors treating Garnett can't find a medical explanation for his current grave condition. Alarmed by the suspicious circumstances, they call the police.
The only information that I received from my supervisor was that there was a child that was apparently on life support, and there were some unusual circumstances surrounding the case.
Blood tests show Garnett has a lethal amount of sodium in his system. But how in the world did it get there? Not naturally, according to doctors.
Something was poisoning this kid and somebody was putting it in his system.
That's correct.
Who did you think that someone was?
Well, I mean, obviously, the caregiver is the mother.
Right away, Lacey is interviewed by police.
No immediate flags. I wanted to hear her story.
Her story made sense.
At that exact moment, I had no reason not to believe what she was telling me.
According to investigators, they had to wonder if this was simply a tragic story of a young mother who has just lost her sick child. Detectives had to consider that maybe the doctors got it wrong. During that same interview with Detective Carfey, Lacey mentions the recent passing of Garnett's father, Blake. Around this same time, Lacey's own father arrives at the hospital.
I introduced myself, shook his hand, told him who I was, and I told him that I was very sorry about the passing of Blake, Garnett's father. And he said to me, "Who's Blake?"
Daddy Blake.
Daddy Blake.
Who was not the father.
Who was not the father.
Who did not die in a tragic accident.
No.
Ends up Blake Robinson is alive and well and working as a Morgan County Sheriff's deputy in Alabama.
Did he have any idea that Lacey was using pictures of him, or someone she claimed to be him, calling him Daddy Blake, and she manufactured this entire story?
No, not until I called him.
Blake tells police he went out on a couple of dates with Lacey, nothing serious or sexual.
For me, that was the biggest red flag, if you will, about Lacey's truthfulness.
Investigators wonder if she lied about Garnett's father, what else might she be lying about? Police obtain a search warrant for Lacey's apartment.
When you executed the search warrant at her apartment, what did you find?
When we walked in, there was a open setting kind of apartment. In the middle of it was a feeding machine pump with what appeared to me to be breast milk in a feeding bag.
And right next to the feeding bag,
There was a small table off to the side. It had all the medications that she had told us. There was like 7, 8 medications that she told Detective Carvey that she was currently giving her son. In the middle of those was a sea salt container.
Sea salt.
Sea salt.
police photograph the apartment. Then they receive a game-changing phone call. It's shocking information coming from Lacey's neighbor, Valerie Plauchet.
Lacey had placed a phone call to her, and the phone call was, can you go to my apartment, take the feeding bag that's on the feeding machine, get rid of it, and don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody.
Correct.
Detectives recover the feeding bag in a second bag from the trash.
Well, they were submitted to the Westchester County lab for analysis, and an astronomical high level of sodium was found in those bags.
Sodium.
Correct.
And he suffered sodium poisoning.
Correct.
Police collect 170 items from Lacey's apartment and question her again.
What was her demeanor?
She would come into the room, crying, hysterical, put her head down, and when we talked to her, she would just look up. There'd be no tears.
Detectives begin to see a pattern of what they believe to be child abuse in one of the rarest forms.
Had you heard of Munchausen's by proxy before this investigation?
Truthfully, no. I've heard of caregivers harming children, but the actual term, no.
Investigators start to build their case, believing Lacey was poisoning her son and then posting it all over social media to grab attention and sympathy. Though she and her lawyers deny Spears suffers from any mental health disorder, Lacey seems to be the poster child for Munchausen by proxy. But how did she get away with this for so long?
If someone were to catch on to her or they would try to investigate her, she knew when it was getting too hot for her to be there, it was time to move.
But the buck stops in New York. Now, investigators just need solid proof, more than just tainted feeding bags and a canister of salt. If only cops could catch Lacey red-handed, or perhaps they already have.
I didn't know the machine was hooked up to video.
New York investigators suspect Lacey Spears has just killed her own 5-year-old son. The boy dying just hours after doctors in this hospital gave him a clean bill of health. Cops claim Spears poisoned her son with lethal levels of salt. And now they believe they have proof. Actual videotape of the heartbreaking murder.
Doing an interview with Garnett's kindergarten teacher, who also happened to be a nurse. She said, he was on an EEG, and we said, yes, he was. She goes, well, where's the video to that? I didn't know there was a video.
Who knew?
I didn't know the machine was hooked up to video.
Yes, video. Frame by frame, the final moments of Garnett's life.
We want to warn you, some of the images are graphic.
The video begins when Garnett checks in on Friday, and it records through Sunday when doctors and nurses tell Lacey that Garnett is healthy enough to go home. After medical personnel leave the room, Lacey appears to take Garnett to the bathroom, just outside of camera range. But when they come back into frame,
When he came back out of that bathroom, few seconds, minutes, he turned into the most sick child, burying his head into the bed, the pillow, turning, retching. He was trying to throw up, but we already know that he couldn't throw up because at 9 months old, he had an operation that kept him from throwing up. It's something that will haunt me. It was probably it's the worst video. We actually had to watch a video of a 5-year-old child being murdered.
Lacey is arrested and charged with murder.
You actually were the
I
one
was the actual
who
one
arrested
arrested
Lacey.
Lacey.
And what did she say to you?
She didn't say anything. She was instructed not to say a word by her attorney.
Lacey's defense team argued she didn't poison her son with salt.
You were in the courtroom.
I was.
Describe Lacey's demeanor.
It was different each day. I think she looked a little scared one time. She looked mad at other times. And once or twice she cried a little bit.
But in court, prosecutors slowed down that video to show what appears to be a feeding tube and some substance in Lacey's hands when she returned from the bathroom with her 5-year-old son. Prosecutors claim that just off camera in the bathroom, Lacey gave Garnett a lethal dose of salt, which moments later caused his brain to swell and ultimately killed him. But there's more. The videotape evidence also shows Lacey on her phone doing Google searches.
She had been on the phone, laying in the bed, and we observed that. Some of those searches were salt poisoning.
On the phone at the time?
On the phone, we can connect the time of the phone to the video and the search that she was doing.
Unimaginable.
He had a right to grow up and a right to grow old, and she stole that from him.
Lacey Spears is found guilty of depraved indifference murder of a child.
Instead of nurturing and protecting a beautiful child, you subjected him to 5 years of torment and pain. One does not have to be a psychologist to realize you suffer from a mental illness, known as Munchausen by proxy.
What does this video indicate to you?
Well, watching it in court, it was brought tears to many of the jurors.
How important was that video in this case?
I think between the video and the amount of salt found in the feeding bags were the icing on the cake, if you will.
She's sentenced to 20 years to life in prison.
Is she a cold-blooded killer?
I believe she is. She sat in that hospital room when her child coded and watched him die. She watched his life slip away when there's a chance that if she would have stepped up and told them what she did, may have changed the outcome.
Mama, Papa.